Nolan was in the middle of barking out a sentence. Fire her entire team for that car the moment they finished the new code. When the elevator doors slid open and he nearly walked straight into me. He didn't even blink. Just brushed past like I wasn't there, with Trent trailing behind him, too busy laughing to notice I'd caught every word. A luxury SUV for the CEO's kid in exchange for my team's jobs. That was the deal. 11 years of late nights, emergency fixes at 3 a.m., holding this place together with nothing but stubbornness and duct tape. And we were worth exactly one lease and a set of heated leather seats. That morning, I looked at myself in the hallway glass and felt something click into place right behind my ribs. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness either. It was colder than that. Final. You'd think after 10 years of loyalty, getting thrown under the bus would come as a shock. But it didn't. It just confirmed what I'd already started to suspect. Real quick. If you're listening to this and haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button and drop a like. 97% of folks never do, but it really helps us keep telling stories like this. You're already here, might as well make it count. Anyway, Skylands Metrics wasn't the kind of place that made headlines. No open floor plans or kombucha bars. No nap pods or culture budget. We were tucked into a bland office park out in Reston, Virginia. And my division, infrastructure engineering, was the backbone. Batch schedulers. ETL pipelines. Frankenstein connectors that held old systems together just long enough to keep everything running. I didn't hire flashy people. I hired the ones who knew how to survive. The ones who could deliver miracles with vague specs and a shoestring budget. And they trusted me to fight for them when no one else would. I wasn't leading because I craved power. I did it because someone had to stand between the chaos and the people actually doing the work. HR didn't care. Finance kept slicing our numbers. Product acted like we were just there to fix their messes. But we held it together. Quietly. Reliably. We were the glue. Then Nolan Vexley oozed in. The board called him a modernization CTO, which basically meant he was a LinkedIn influencer in a $900 hoodie. He didn't know our systems. Didn't bother to learn. He was there for buzzwords, dashboards, and quick wins, especially the kind he could take credit for. Started wiping names off changelogs. Claimed work he barely understood. Once even asked if our ETL cron job could be Dockerized into a single GraphQL endpoint. That line alone should have been grounds for immediate removal. And then there was Trent, the CEO's golden boy. All of 26. Just wrapped up a tech MBA that probably cost more than my house. He strolled around our floor like he was visiting a zoo, glancing at people's monitors like we were exhibits. First time he talked to me, he asked if we had any intern-level tickets I could crush to build some operational visibility. I told him no. He gave me this smug little look like a vending machine that ate his dollar. Still, I kept us moving. Kept the code clean and the drama low. Right up until that moment in the elevator. They didn't think I'd hear them. Didn't think it mattered if I did. But that morning I did something I hadn't done in over 5 years. I opened up my private repo. It was a fork of our core engine cleaner modular built for audit trails. Not done yet, but it was mine. My design. My logic. My licensing. All tied to my personal entity. I'd started it years ago on weekends just to scratch the itch. Now it had a reason to exist. Back at my desk I kept my head down. Stayed quiet. I smiled when Nolan barked out orders like a sitcom general. Nodded along when Trent cracked that we should automate all this infra stuff so we don't need those salary sinks. On the outside I played along. On the inside I was busy documenting everything. Every update. Every shift. I revised contract headers, double-checked timestamp logic, and reinforced every audit trigger. In the mirror build I'd been quietly crafting, every line of code had clear legal ownership. Every function carried a license header with my name on it. Nolan didn't read code. He never would. But someone else would. Sooner or later. He dropped the hammer at exactly 6:13 p.m. Late enough to dodge pushback, early enough to catch us before we logged off. Investor demo's been moved up. We need the new engine finalized, tested, and ready to deploy by the 18th. No exceptions. He grinned like he just handed us free pizza. Trent stood in the doorway behind him, arms folded like a smug game show host. Clock's ticking, he added, like this was some startup pitch and not the survival of 7 people who'd given everything. Nobody said a word. You don't argue with guys already holding the knife. We'd been rebuilding that engine for almost a year, slow burn, low visibility. It was never meant to be front and center until Q3. Now suddenly it was top priority. The whole system needed to be investor ready in under 3 weeks. No extra people. No added budget. Just the same 7 exhausted engineers being shoved toward a cliff so 2 clowns could flash a shiny chart over finger sandwiches in sparkling water. My stomach didn't clench. It soured. Later that night, back at my apartment, I combed through the repo logs. The week before, Nolan had quietly added a new field to the staging checklist. A simple lead engineer sign-off required line. Harmless on its own. But paired with the sudden deadline, it stank. Like bait in a trap. I brewed a pot of coffee. It was pushing 11 p.m. when I reopened the architecture sketch of my private fork. I hadn't touched it since March. And still it looked solid, better than I remembered. No legacy junk. No patches duct taped together. Just a clean modular framework built from the ground up, anchored to a license agreement I'd written myself and filed under my LLC, Clearspan Systems. The legal clause was tight. Non-derivative private use permitted for affiliated contributors. All external execution under contract subject to premium rate schedule. Translation: use it in-house, no problem. Fire me and try to profit? We'll be talking invoice. I wasn't planning to deploy it. Not yet. But I hardened it anyway. I added checksum logs, locked the encryption keys in a secure vault, and rewrote the audit handler to track every external request. Then came the elevator. I was heading down to the lobby fridge for an energy drink. Past midnight. Thought I had the place to myself. But before the elevator doors were fully open, I heard them talking. The moment they finished the new engine, just clean sweep 'em, Nolan was saying. No severance, no rollout phase. Just gone. Trent chuckled. Jesus. That's savage. But fair. Think you'll get enough out of it to cover the Escalade. That or a Cayenne. I'm not picky. But he was. That's what stuck in my head, the precision of it. This wasn't downsizing. This was a blood offering. Burn the team. Keep the code. Buy the car. I didn't flinch. Didn't move. I let the elevator go back down without them ever seeing me. When I returned to my desk, I logged into the building's security system remotely. Found the audio channel for Elevator B by the server room. Timestamp: 12:08 a.m. I pulled the clip. Saved the file. I saved the audio file 3 times: local drive, remote server, cold storage backup. Then I logged into the internal contract repo, pulled up the staging checklist, and added a single line beneath Nolan's signature field. Delivery confirmation triggers contractual license audit. See Schedule C. Schedule C had been uploaded the week before. Just another boring legal attachment no one had opened. Near the bottom in bold text it said, "Early termination of contributors prior to signed consolidation agreement shall revert all work classification to premium consulting rates, not less than $45,000 per developer, per hour, retroactive to project inception. No alarms. No alerts. Just a simple clause buried in the kind of doc nobody ever reads. I hit save. Then I locked down my fork. And waited. It was only 17 words. No big fanfare. No flashing warnings. Just a small update to an old document buried deep in the internal system: contractual execution schedule, developer license attribution. I dropped a footnote under section 4.3 and linked it to Schedule C. Now properly timestamped, notarized, and archived in our compliance system. It looked like legal housekeeping. Dull. Dense. Harmless. Exactly what I needed it to look like. A week passed. Then 10 days. Nolan never even glanced at it. He was too busy practicing his visionary tech leader face in the executive break room mirror. One afternoon, I saw him trying to pitch our orchestration queue to an investor using the phrase, real-time generative sync. The rep stared at him like he just offered to install a Bluetooth toilet brush. Nolan just smiled harder, like he was nailing it. Meanwhile, I kept sharpening the shadow system. The fork, codename Arcadia, was running clean. I'd optimized the task scheduler, rebuilt the load balancer to handle tiered failover scenarios, even added a functional UI for good measure. It wasn't just lean, it was airtight. And more importantly, it was mine. Legally. Structurally. Entirely. Because here's the thing. Skylant's core engine was a stitched-together mess. Years of patches, legacy hacks, unlogged tweaks. A digital Frankenstein. But Arcadia wasn't that. Arcadia was built clean. Every line authored from scratch. Every container mapped to my licensing framework. No gray zones. No derivation. No ownership gaps. Which meant when they tried to claim it, they'd hit a locked gate. An illegal invoice they'd never see coming. Nolan had already set the fuse without realizing it. 2 Fridays before the investor demo, he pinged me a PDF. Sign this for delivery milestone 2. Need it for board prep. Thanks. I opened the file. Page 3, lower right corner. Lead System Engineer Certification, final module delivered per SLA. Licensing reviewed. No objections noted. I read it. Twice. Then sent it back without saying a word. He signed his half 2 minutes later. Just like that, the clause kicked in. That afternoon, I glanced over at my team, Tasha squinting at a Python thread leak, Ron mapping a brutal data schema by hand, Kieran untangling a hellish shell script some long-gone intern had duct-taped together. People who'd carried this place on their backs for years. People who still believed I'd protect them. And I thought, Nolan's about to burn them for a car. And he doesn't even know how to spell YAML. But not this time. The next day, I locked the main branch with a final code freeze. Then I deployed a CI/CD validator that blocked all deployments unless the license audit was cleared. Not a single build could go live without my sign-off. Silently, I rerouted all deployment artifacts to a read-only mirror. Fully documented, securely archived, and inaccessible to anyone who didn't have a verified SSH key generated from my machine. By that point, Arcadia was locked into version. Stable. Solid. And it didn't just replicate our existing engine. It outclassed it. Top to bottom. And not a single exec had any idea it even existed. I started sleeping better. Not because it was over. Because I was finally ready. HR pinged a check-in invite at 4:22 p.m. on a Tuesday, right as Ron was packing up to catch his kid's orchestra recital. The calendar note said, "Nothing urgent. Just aligning on future staffing projections." I joined the call muted, camera off, and let them walk themselves straight into it. Didn't take long. So, the HR rep started, trying to sound casual and missing by a mile. "What's your sense of when the final engine module will be submitted?" "Ballpark is fine." I kept my tone neutral. "We're aligning delivery with the previously communicated SLA. You should already have access." "Oh right, yeah. Just confirming." And unrelated, which meant absolutely related. "Do you anticipate your team staying on after Q1? Or are most of them on contracts ending this phase?" I paused, long enough for the silence to stretch. All current contracts were renewed through July, per Nolan's directive. Nothing but quiet on the other end for a moment. Then a chipper. "Okay, just getting my spreadsheet in order. Thanks." Nolan was either feeding them garbage or nothing at all. I closed the call and stared at my screen. My team was just 3 doors down. Still holed up in the makeshift war room we'd turned into Demo Prep Central. You could feel the tension in how they moved. Not frantic. Not confused. Just that tight, wired energy people get when they know they're being circled by something smiling with too many teeth. Trent had been lurking around more often. Always with a car brochure jammed under his laptop like it was some kind of power prop. "Midnight Gray or Sapphire Ice?" he asked one day, waving a Porsche Cayenne pamphlet like we were co-workers and not collateral damage. Can't decide which one screams leadership more. I didn't say a word. Just made a note in my doc. Monday 3:17 p.m. break room Trent vehicle flex. For a guy who couldn't code his way out of a wet paper bag, he sure had a lot of thoughts about how overstaffed we were. Meanwhile, Nolan was keeping up the illusion. Told the board in his pre-demo update that everything was on track for a flawless back-end transition and zero risk during handoff. Not a single mention of licensing, or Arcadia, or the fact that once he approved delivery and then pulled the trigger on layoffs, he'd be setting fire to his own chair. I didn't stop him. I was busy getting things ready. That night, I backed up Arcadia onto 2 separate encrypted drives. Each one partitioned, verified, and timestamped. Under the licensing clause Nolan had already signed, I was in the clear. Totally protected. Any non-public, Non-deployed systems I built and maintained were legally considered IP of ClearSpan systems until formally consolidated under a new agreement. And that agreement didn't exist. Not yet. I mapped every dependency, built a manifest, tagged each module with its contributor origin, mine, Kieran's, Tasha's, Ron's. Every one of them had already received an invite to ClearSpan's private contributor agreement. I'd sent them out months ago, quietly, without raising eyebrows. They hadn't asked questions. Not directly, but they were starting to catch on. Kieran, who normally backed things up once a week, was now versioning his test suite like clockwork. Tasha pulled me aside and asked if we should start logging our commit hashes off platform, just in case something gets weird. Ron showed up one morning with his personal laptop, ran his entire module in an isolated sandbox, and wiped the whole thing clean by lunchtime. Nobody said the word sabotage. Nobody said betrayal. But we all felt it. Something had shifted. The air in the room had changed. The way we looked at each other. The way we typed. We were still building, but now we were building like people who knew they might have to escape from their own house with the blueprints in their pockets. And if the ceiling came crashing down, we weren't getting buried with it. When I walked into the conference room that morning, it was already buzzing, half investor relations, half jittery tech leadership trying to look essential. Demo day always feels like a slow burn panic, but today had a different edge. The vibe was nervous, sure, but there was something else in the mix, like everyone was waiting for a show and wasn't quite sure who was about to get roasted. Nolan was in full meltdown mode, storming around the room, shouting at a poor intern about the font size on the slide deck. Why does this look like it was made in PowerPoint for toddlers? I said sleek, not Sesame Street. But I wasn't watching Nolan. I was watching the man he hadn't noticed yet, Paul Denton. Outside counsel. Not internal legal, not compliance. Paul was Skyland's high-priced, high-stakes legal fixer. The kind of guy you call when you're already bleeding and hoping to keep the lawsuit from hitting the arteries. He was seated at the far end of the table, flipping through a binder like he'd just found a live grenade taped between the pages. I kept my head down, pretended to scroll through my notes, and watched his face drain like someone had unplugged the color. By 8:47 a.m. he stopped flipping. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked up, eyes sharp now. These fees, these revert terms, who authorized this? Nolan paused mid-rant, confused. What fees? Paul pointed to the binder. Clause 4.3c. Cross-reference with Schedule C. It's active. Signed. Certified. You confirmed delivery without consolidation. Nolan blinked. Like Paul had just spoken another language. Paul didn't stop. According to this document, any contributor terminated before contract consolidation triggers a premium classification rate. $45,000. Per developer. Per hour. Retroactive to project inception. The room froze. I watched Nolan try to process it. You could see the wheels turning, slow, rusty, grinding against something they didn't understand. Then he laughed. Forced. Nervous. That's insane. No way that clause is enforceable. Paul didn't even flinch. You signed it. Nolan's mouth flapped open again, then shut. Then open once more, desperate. That's buried in some legal subsection nobody reads. It's spam. Spam you authorized, Paul replied. Then he stood up. I'll need access to building security logs. Audio recordings. Last Tuesday morning. Elevator channel B. I didn't move. Just sat still, hands folded, as his footsteps clicked away down the hall. 10 minutes later he returned with a flash drive. Plugged it straight into the HDMI input. The audio kicked on immediately, grainy but clear. Nolan's voice, plain as day. Fire her entire team for that car the moment they finish the new engine. No severance. Just clean house. Then Trent, laughing like it was all a joke. Think you'll get enough out of it to cover the Escalade? That or a Cayenne. I'm not picky. And just like that, the whole room went still. Investors froze mid-scroll. One of them stood, leaned into another's ear, then walked out while already dialing his phone. The CFO blinked, stunned like he'd just taken a slap across the face. Is that current? Paul nodded. Timestamps a match. Audio chain of custodies clean. Trent tried to stammer something about context. Maybe sarcasm. But nobody cared. Every eye had turned to Nolan. who now looked like he'd just been hit with a truck made of guilt and litigation. The HR director leaned in slowly, staring at the document in front of her. Her voice was paper-thin. How far back does it apply? Paul didn't even look up. 7 months. Per the schedule. That's when it hit me. Not pride. Not revenge. Just power. Cold. Quiet. Controlled. Ice, not fire. I didn't speak. Didn't need to. They had written their own story. All I did was press play. And now the invoice was doing the talking. The demo room sat untouched. Out in the hallway, the investors, clad in tailored suits and VC swagger, clustered just outside the glass doors. Arms crossed. Faces tight. Not a single one dared to step inside. They weren't being dramatic. They were waiting. Waiting for legal to confirm that walking into that room, even just to observe, wouldn't make them liable for what was quickly becoming a financial explosion with a timer already ticking. And believe me, it was a bomb. Inside, Nolan was unraveling in real time, flipping through the contract like he could pull out a magic trick that'd erase his signature. It was buried. It doesn't count if it's buried, right? That's not enforceable. His voice cracked halfway through the word enforceable. No one answered. Paul just stared, calm and cold. That dead-eyed legal look that says, "You loaded this gun yourself. I'm just here to watch it fire." Then the door slammed open. Everett Vexley stormed in, founder emeritus chair, and still the guy everyone called when things got real. He hadn't been in the building in over a year. But when someone whispers your last name alongside millions in legal exposure, you don't stroll in. You descend. "What the hell am I hearing about a $45,000 hourly rate?" he snapped. His coat was still on. Hair windblown. Like someone had called him in the middle of breakfast and he'd broken every traffic law getting here. "Someone explain." "Now." Nolan tried to go first. "Big mistake. It's just a clause, some obscure clause, that got activated by accident during a breakdown in." Everett raised a hand. He didn't yell. Just lifted his palm, and Nolan shut up like someone hit a mute button. "Is the clause valid?" Paul gave a single nod. "Signed. Time-stamped. Licensing structure is airtight. Fee schedule links directly to early termination prior to consolidation. Retroactive." Everett's jaw clenched. "Retroactive how far?" "From project start," Paul said. 7 months. 8 engineers. That's $4.9 million. Per head. Everett turned and stared straight at Trent. Trent looked like a frat boy who just figured out the keg was full of gasoline. "It was just locker room talk," he mumbled, inching toward the exit. "We weren't really gonna fire them, we were just—" Paul didn't say a word. He just plugged the flash drive back in. The room filled with Nolan's voice again. Fire her entire team for that car the moment they finish the new engine. No severance. Just clean house. Everett let out a slow exhale, like something inside him cracked. He didn't respond. Didn't argue. Just turned around and walked out. 10 minutes later, my badge lit up. Access granted to a private conference room. My entire team was summoned. Tasha looked like all the blood had drained from her face. Ron kept fiddling with his glasses, as if maybe the lenses were distorting reality. Kieran leaned toward me and asked softly, "Should I start backing up my personal files?" We all thought this was it. That we were next. Because in stories like these, everyone knows how it goes. Blame the scapegoats, wipe the logs, burn the evidence. But that's not what happened. When Everett walked in, he didn't give us that blank HR stare or the stiff tone of someone from the C-suite trying to fake control. He looked at us like a man who just stepped into the engine room of a sinking ship and realized someone else had drilled the holes. "You're not being terminated," he said. "You're being protected. You're critical personnel until further notice. No one touches your contracts. Not finance. Not HR. Not anyone." Kieran blinked. Tasha whispered, "Wait, what?" Everett turned toward me. "I assume you're the architect of this clause?" I didn't confirm. Didn't have to. He nodded anyway. "There's an emergency board session in 40 minutes. I suggest you stay near your phone." And just like that, he walked out. We didn't say anything for a long moment. Just sat there, stunned, letting the weight of everything we almost lost settle in. I looked around at my team. These brilliant, exhausted people who had quietly kept the company alive while execs played power games, and saw something shift behind their eyes. Not relief. Not yet. But belief. That maybe, just maybe, we weren't disposable. Out in the hall, I could hear raised voices. Nolan was shouting again. HR was pushing back. Trent was trying to play dumb, throwing around words like confusion and context. The board? They were blaming all of them. And in that moment between the blaming and the fallout, we changed. We weren't targets anymore. We were the invoice. The crisis attorney arrived like a storm in a charcoal suit, carrying a binder that probably had a higher net worth than my car. He didn't waste time on introductions. No handshake. No chit-chat. Just walked straight into the boardroom like he was walking onto the wreckage of a ship he'd already predicted would sink. He laid out the paperwork like crime scene photos. Signatures. Timestamps. Cross-references. No drama. Just the kind of cold, methodical precision that makes people sweat. Then he held up the page Nolan had signed, pinched between two fingers like it might contaminate him. This clause wasn't hidden, he said flatly. It was footnoted. Indexed. Cross-linked. You initialed it. Nolan scoffed. I didn't read that part. It's boilerplate. The attorney blinked once. Slowly, like someone had just told him gravity was optional. You activated premium consulting fees with that signature. This isn't boilerplate. This is catastrophic. He let the page drop onto the table like a gavel. Silence. One junior board member opened their mouth, then shut it again. Another tried to discreetly search retroactive liability exposure on their phone under the table. The attorney pressed on, steady and clinical. The only legally sound option right now is to freeze all terminations immediately. Firing any engineers at this point would constitute a second triggering event, stacked on top of the first. I advise full containment. No personnel changes without legal review and clearance. Everett didn't argue. He just nodded and pulled out his phone. Tapped out a text. 30 seconds later, the SVP of HR stepped into the room. She looked like someone who'd been caught in the blast radius. Her screen lit up. She read the message. Looked around. Effective immediately, she announced. All termination workflows are frozen. Pause all active removals. Executive team will meet for structured mitigation review. Out on the floor, everything had gone still. Like the whole building was holding its breath. Emails stopped. Calls hung mid-ring. Nobody was working anymore, they were watching. Waiting. Then the ping started. Ping. Was that you? Ping. You saved their jobs, didn't you? Ping. We heard legal shut it all down. That clause, was that yours? I didn't answer. Not one of them. But I didn't delete them either. Let the rumors breathe. Let them build pressure like steam in a sealed chamber. I wasn't looking for applause. I wasn't interested in the spotlight. What I needed was distance. And leverage. At 11:38 a.m., the board's emergency session went live. Nolan looked like a ghost, gray, hollowed out, clutching a coffee cup like it was life support. His usual confidence had evaporated. Trent was patched in from another room, posture stiff, background blur cutting off half his head like the system was trying to erase him early. The first question came sharp, without ceremony. Why didn't you flag the fee clause? Nolan fumbled something about legal language and oversight. Second question. Did you issue termination threats on a recorded line before contract consolidation? Trent tried to deny it. The audio played before he could finish the sentence. By 11:52 a.m., they were both muted. By 11:56 a.m., they were both suspended. Indefinitely. The call ended with Everett's voice, steady and final. Effective immediately, engineering reports to me. No changes without my direct approval. Afterward, I stood by the server room window, looking down at the parking lot. The Escalade brochure Trent had left on the break room counter was now crumpled in the trash. The wind from the cracked maintenance door cut through the silence, cold, clean. Everything felt still. Not safe, but still. We were no longer targets. We were back in play. And for the first time, we weren't the ones being played. At 7:12 the next morning, Finance dropped a mass update. Subject line. Budget allocations Q1 adjusted. Critical infrastructure support prioritized. No explanation. No apology. Just a brutal U-turn. Every slash Nolan had made was rolled back. Headcounts reinstated. Contractor cuts reversed. Even Ron's certification fund, postponed 3 times, was suddenly marked as urgent and approved. HR followed with their own message at 9:03 a.m. All Q1 transition plans are suspended pending board review. Do not initiate offboarding. Retention bonuses to follow. Tasha read it aloud, slow and confused. Did we just get unfired and given a bonus? Kieran leaned back in his chair, stunned. This feels like the eye of a hurricane. Not the eye. The rebuild. Overnight, everything shifted. The silence cracked open. People started talking again. Not gossip. Real questions, cautious admiration, praise wrapped in curiosity. Legal. Risk. Compliance. They all wanted to know where that clause came from. No one said it outright. But Paul Denton knew. Everett did too. I didn't take a bow. No speeches. No smug looks. I just got back to work. At 11:27 a.m., I sent Everett a link. Read-only access to Arcadia through my LLC. Fully documented. Versioned. Transparent. No pitch. No flair. Just the blueprint for a system that hadn't buckled when everything else did. He replied 30 minutes later. Reading now. 2 hours after that, I got called into the executive room. Just me and Everett. He held a printed copy of the build summary like it was something fragile. The corners were worn. He'd read it more than once. This is modular, he said. Elegant. No vendor lock. No fragile cron dependencies. And the test logs. He paused and looked up at me. This runs circles around what we've got in production. I didn't say a word. Everett leaned forward across the table. We're replacing the old engine with this. No discussion. No cross-functional vote. No roadmap meetings or change management decks. Just a quiet, absolute decision, the kind only a former CEO could hand down like that. In a blink, Arcadia went from a ghost repo to the core of Skylant's future. Outside that room, Nolan's office was already being packed up. 2 security guards, a compliance officer, a single cardboard box of personal effects, and that absurd "Innovate or Die" poster he used to wave it like it held divine wisdom. Trent had disappeared entirely. Word was he'd been reassigned to a non-operational advisory role, which was corporate for. His badge still works, but only in the parking lot. You'd think I'd feel triumphant. But what hit me instead was something quieter. Heavier. Like putting down a weight I'd carried so long I forgot it wasn't supposed to be there. Later that night, Everett messaged me again. I'll need you to formally reintegrate Arcadia into the platform. Under new naming. I responded with one request. Full autonomy for my team. We choose our people. We define the architecture. No more top-down gimmicks. No more band-aids from the exec playbook. We build this right or not at all. His reply was just 2 words. Granted. Unconditionally. That was the shift. Not just in power. Not just in product. But in trust. For the first time in 11 years, we weren't treated like a liability waiting to be outsourced or downsized. We were the future. And they knew they had to earn us. The next strategy session felt different. Smaller table. No interns scrambling with dongles. No Nolan posing in some tight suit pretending to understand anything beyond buzzwords. No Trent, mercifully. Just 7 of us, quiet, grounded, and fully aware that the center of gravity had shifted to our side. Everett opened the call with 3 simple words. We're ready now. The lead investor didn't even ask about the old system. They'd already seen the Arcadia testbed results, uptime percentages, load balancing metrics, real failover logs. It spoke for itself. Halfway through the call, their principal architect leaned in, nodded slowly, and said something that wrapped closure in praise. This doesn't look like a rebuild. This looks like someone fixed what was broken before it failed. The term sheet changed on the spot. Not just numbers, structure. Our work wasn't treated like a side feature anymore. It was the foundation. The pipeline. The investment didn't just go through. It locked us in as the strategic core of Skylant's future architecture. 2 weeks later, the org chart was updated. For the first time in company history, infrastructure engineering wasn't buried beneath product or finance. We had our own branch, our own budget, titles corrected, salaries fixed. People who were treated like background tech support were now central pillars. Tasha got her promotion. Ron's mentorship initiative got greenlit. Kieran's architecture stream became an official training track. Nolan's name? Gone. Not reassigned. Not moved. Just erased. No one asked about Trent. No one needed to. I'd started working remotely a few days a week, mostly from the cafe across the street. It was quiet, served solid espresso, and didn't come with the ambient noise of founders pitching meditation apps for cats or AI that writes horoscopes. Close enough to walk in when needed, far enough to breathe. That morning I was finishing the onboarding guide for new hires. Clean, readable documentation, clear security protocols, transparent attribution policies. The kind of thing Nolan used to scoff at. A waste of engineering cycles, he'd say, waving off documentation like it was beneath us. My laptop pinged. Notification. Skylance HR. Final termination confirmation. Nolan Vexley. Severance package. Revoked due to contractual breach. I took a sip of coffee. The crema was smooth. Balanced. A second notification followed right behind it. Leadership changelog. Trent Vexley. Removed from succession pathway. No further executive consideration. I didn't smile. Didn't pause. Just closed both pop-ups and kept typing. Across the street, the lights flicked on in Nolan's old office, top floor corner view. Someone new settling in. Probably still thinking power means a parking space and a leather chair. But that's not power. Power isn't how loud you speak. It's not a title stamped on a glass door. It's writing the clause before they ever see the contract. They planned to fire us the second we crossed the finish line. Instead, they handed themselves the invoice.